The story of the Battle of Gaugamela begins in a small backwater of the ancient world, a region north of the Greek peninsula called Macedon. This mountainous kingdom had a fearsome reputation. From earliest childhood, Macedonian boys like Alexander were raised to be warriors.
No! Pali! Pali, Nexarchis!
Alexander was familiar with the great heroes of Homeric legend, and he came from a society that valued those heroes. They reveled in anything which demonstrated their personal courage.
Alexander's father was King Philip of Macedon. An accomplished soldier and astute diplomat, Philip had unified the warring tribes of Macedonia, but his ambitions drove him to extend his power further. He made his only son a cavalry commander at the age of 16. Philip was a very successful military leader, whose victories were largely due to his strategic vision.
What Philip did was to remake Macedonia into the most powerful state in the ancient world.
He literally changed the way armies were organized and the way they fought.
Philip creates an army of professionals. He actually pays them, and pays them well.
They drilled year-round, and they were in units along with people from their home regions. So they were very cohesive, and they were very well-trained, and therefore much more maneuverable.
With Macedon transformed into a formidable regional power, Philip intended to unify the disparate city-states of Greece under his command.
Ormenio, prasta pragmata.
Hoi Athanaio, ke hoi boitute. Sumi Mackensen.
Ko profo eso, tus Athanaius. Oposun epithoso, sun capsumen et kainos. Katastasos Alexandron. Hegemon ton hippon. Et toimos esti.
Exprepis, Alexander.
The other formative influence in Alexander's life was his mother, Olympias. The daughter of the king of Epirus, she had been taken by Philip as a spoil of war. Olympia's relationship with Philip was often difficult, especially after Philip took a second wife. But Alexander loved his mother.
She had sort of been cast aside in favor of another, more beautiful new wife. And so you might say Alexander had some resentment because he felt that his mother had been wrongfully denied a certain privileged place. Olympias might even have feared that this new wife would produce a son, who Philip would then favor as his heir, rather than favoring Alexander.
In 336 BC, when Alexander was 20 years old, Philip of Macedon was assassinated. Some suspected Olympia's involvement, perhaps to safeguard her son's future. But regardless of who was responsible, for Alexander, it meant one thing.
Alexandra.
Opetermu technique.
Nai. Allaho basileoso.
Alexander had been well trained, and he inherited many of his father's best qualities. But even Philip could not have imagined how powerful the Macedonian army would soon become under the leadership of the new king. Within a year of his father's death, Alexander had asserted control over much of Greece, extending the Macedonian kingdom north to the Danube and west towards the Adriatic. The Macedonian army seemed unstoppable. Next, Alexander turned his attention east to Persia.
The Persian Empire was, in its day, the greatest empire in history. There had never been anything like this, as big as the Persian Empire, as organized as the Persian Empire. At its height, it stretched from the Indo-Pakistani border in the east all the way to Macedon, and in the south, it included Egypt. Persians and the Greeks had been at war in one way or another since about 550 BC, so for well over 200 years.
Persia had invaded Greece, had conquered Macedonia, had burned Athens to the ground, had violated the temples of the gods.
Alexander grew up with the idea that the ultimate grand prize was the Persian Empire.
In 334 BC, Alexander led an army of 45,000 men east into land claimed by the Persian Empire. Legend says that while marching through the center of present-day Turkey, Alexander visited a temple outside the town of Gordium. The temple was the home of the famous riddle, the Gordian knot, an ancient puzzle said to have been created by the gods. The knot was so intricate that it was claimed whoever succeeded in untying it would become Lord of Asia. This was an irresistible challenge for Alexander, who had already declared that he would conquer that continent.
In those days, particularly for a guy like Alexander, who was steeped in the Iliad and the whole heroic tradition, if you were a king, you were supposed to go out and conquer the world.
Eloton perede ukedl, mitinakai todo etus pelus 15 igresete.
Epelaxman epitusakros. To this mu epiteluse sumbe bekotos. Basilius con Macedon. Con Henegan con Helenan. Ike archo. Tes asias.
The inner plain that he dwelt on was populated by Achilles, Hector, Heracles, the great heroes. And that was what he wanted to do. He wanted to leave a name that would never die, to accomplish things that no one had ever done before.
Popos mende imparcate. Tuapi de Desmond. Etus pelus isquisate.
Women legason hote paisas. To Desmond Kaila Lusta Ife.
Excelano to Histora to remove.
Whether or not the story is true, I think it tells us something about the nature of Alexander, his character, that he was willing to look for inventive and new solutions. And even more than that, that he was driven to succeed.
Alexander's intention to conquer the Persian Empire was no secret. But the first Macedonian strike on Persia was not taken seriously by King Darius.
Darius III was the great king of Persia. He came to the Persian throne in 336 BC.
Darius was told that Alexander and his army had breached Persian soil. The question then was, what would he do about it?
The Persians want to have an early victory against Alexander, nip it in the bud, fight him before he can advance far from where he's landed.
But the Persian response was insufficient. They were defeated at the Battle of Granicus, at the Battle of Issus, and at the Siege of Tyre. As Darius watched the surprising military success of the young general, he began to build up his army.
Many of his advisors said, don't fight regular battles with the Macedonian army. They're simply too good. The risk of losing is too great. Instead, avoid battle and retreat. Let the formidable terrain of Southwest Asia defeat Alexander. Destroy all the food, burn all the crops, give him nothing to eat. And that will go a long way towards defeating him. That kind of policy is very difficult for Darius to follow because he needs to prove himself. And traditionally, a Persian king proves himself by winning battles.
Before a final military showdown with Alexander, Darius attempted to negotiate.
Darius sent several notes to Alexander, offering him peace treaty and various terms.
He told Alexander that if he would stop campaigning, that Darius would give him money, would give him half of his empire that he had already conquered up to that point, and even the hand of his daughter in marriage.
Alexander, in